I had a baby while my husband was away on a business trip, but this isn't his story. Lisa always thought her life was perfect. Happily married to Mark, a man who seemed to embody everything one could wish for in a partner, caring, ambitious, and reliable. She felt content. But when Mark accepted an offer to lead a major project overseas, their idyllic world cracked. He left for Europe for a year, promising the time would fly by. For Lisa, however, the year dragged endlessly. Their suburban Denver home felt like an empty shell. Silence enveloped her during morning coffee, afternoons in her office, and even at night when she lay in bed, struggling to sleep. They called each other, exchanged letters, and shared photos, but something still felt amiss. Her friend Sarah, a colleague, constantly invited Lisa to join group outings. "You need to get out and have some fun, or you'll turn into a recluse," Sarah often said. Lisa usually declined, but this time, she gave in to her friend's insistence. The company party took place in a trendy downtown lounge. Retro-style lamps cast a cozy glow, and jazzy background music gave the event the feel of a scene from a movie. Lisa felt awkward, holding a glass of wine and trying to engage in conversations she found utterly uninteresting. Then she saw him. Alex, an old acquaintance she hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. Standing by the bar, he exuded confidence with a touch of mystery. Her heart skipped a beat. Back in college, they had been friends, but his flirtatious nature and openness always left her slightly on edge. "Alex, is that you?" Lisa asked, approaching him. "Lisa, no way. You haven't changed a bit," he said with the same charming smile that once made her feel special. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, as if no time had passed. Alex spoke about his business, travels, and latest adventures. Lisa realized she was laughing sincerely for the first time in months. She lost track of time until Alex offered to walk her home. Standing at her doorstep, Lisa tried to stay composed. She thanked him, but as she moved to close the door, Alex placed a hand on her shoulder. His gaze was serious yet warm. "It was great being with you tonight. I feel like you've forgotten what it's like to be happy," he said. Lisa didn't know how to respond. Inside, conflicting emotions raged. It was a moment of weakness, but his proximity left her vulnerable. Alex leaned in, and their lips met. It was a fleeting impulse, but even after she closed the door behind him, the guilt lingered. Lisa knew she had crossed a line, but there was no undoing it now. Weeks passed after that night. Lisa tried to erase the memory from her mind, convincing herself it had been a mistake, a momentary lapse that would never happen again. But now, as she stared into the mirror, her eyes betrayed a fear she couldn't hide, even from herself. One morning, waking up with an unusual fatigue, Lisa realized something was wrong. She felt nauseous in the mornings, her appetite vanished, and the familiar aroma of coffee now made her sick. Doubts crept in, but she was too scared to even think about them. "This is impossible," she repeated to herself. "It's just stress." But each day, her anxiety grew. 2 weeks later, Lisa finally mustered the courage to buy a pregnancy test. Standing in the bathroom, she waited for the result. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the neighbors might hear it. 2 bold lines. It felt like a lightning strike. Lisa sank onto the edge of the tub, unable to believe what she saw. All her fears had taken shape. The life she had so carefully built now teetered on the brink of collapse. The days that followed were a blur. She couldn't focus at work, avoided phone calls from Mark, and even from Sarah. Lisa ran through the options in her mind, but none felt right. Tell Mark? But how? He'll figure it out. It'll break his heart, she thought while sitting on the couch. Her phone vibrated. It was Alex. She hadn't responded to his messages since that night, hoping he'd take the hint and disappear. But Alex didn't seem ready to fade away so easily. "How are you? Can we meet? I want to talk," he texted. Lisa felt cornered. She couldn't simply ignore what had happened. But telling Alex about the pregnancy was even more terrifying than telling Mark. She met him at a small cafe far from their neighborhood. Alex showed up with the same confidence she always found both charming and intimidating. "Is something wrong? You vanished and I've been worried," he said, looking her directly in the eyes. "Everything's fine," Lisa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Really? Because you don't look fine. What's going on? Lisa realized she couldn't hide the truth any longer. Summoning all her courage, she blurted it out quickly, as if that could ease her burden. Alex, I'm pregnant. His face changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by shock mixed with worry. What? Are you sure? Lisa nodded. Alex closed his eyes, as though trying to process the information. And what do you plan to do? He finally asked. Lisa didn't know what to say. She truly didn't know what to do. All she felt was overwhelming despair. I haven't decided yet, she whispered, lowering her gaze. Alex reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. I'm here for you, Lisa. Whatever you decide. But was it really that simple? Lisa knew this situation could tear their lives apart. That evening, as she returned home, her phone rang. It was Mark. His voice, as always, was full of warmth and care. Lisa, I thought I'd let you know first. I've got some news. I'm coming home earlier than planned. The silence in the room became unbearable. The days passed, and Lisa felt the weight of her secret growing heavier. She tried to act as if everything was fine when talking to Mark, but every conversation was laced with tension. His warm voice on the other end of the line, which once brought her peace, now served as a reminder of her mistake. Meanwhile, Alex wasn't about to let things go. After their cafe meeting, he began messaging more often. Lisa tried to keep him at arm's length, explaining that she needed more time. But Alex was persistent. His texts and calls became more frequent, and she realized he wasn't going to disappear from her life. One evening, as Lisa was preparing dinner, there was a sudden knock at the door. She opened it and froze in place. Alex stood before her. "What are you doing here?" she asked in surprise, trying to stay calm, though her voice trembled. "Lisa, I can't do this. I can't sit around waiting for you to decide what happens next. We need to talk," he said, his eyes locked on hers. Lisa glanced around, as if worried someone might see them together. "This isn't the place to talk. You need to go." Alex stepped closer, his voice soft yet insistent. "We're both in this, and I won't let you make all the decisions alone." Lisa let out a heavy sigh and opened the door wider. They sat in the living room, and Alex began speaking. "I understand you're scared, but I'm scared too. We can't ignore what's happened. If this is my child, I want to be part of their life," he said with a seriousness that struck Lisa deeply. Her heart raced. She didn't know how to respond. His words made her feel the weight of her responsibility even more. I don't know how Mark will handle this. He's coming home in a few weeks, and I don't know how to tell him," she admitted, feeling tears well up in her eyes. Alex leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "You're not alone. I'll help you. But you have to be honest with him, and we need to figure this out together." Suddenly, there was another knock at the door. Lisa froze, glancing at Alex, who looked just as startled. She stood up, dreading the worst, and opened the door. Mark stood there. "Hi, Lisa. I came home earlier than planned. Wanted to surprise you," he said with a smile. Lisa felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Behind her, she heard Alex slowly rise from the couch. Lisa stood frozen, like a statue. Her heart pounded in her ears, each beat echoing loudly in her temples, and every second felt like an eternity. Mark stood at the threshold, his smile slightly puzzled but warm. He held a small suitcase, his gaze drifting from Lisa to the interior of the house. "I couldn't wait to see you. So, I came home early," he said, spreading his arms for an embrace. Lisa forced herself to move, allowing him to pull her into a hug. She heard the suitcase slide to the floor and felt his arms wrap around her. But instead of melting into the embrace, all she could feel was cold, paralyzing fear. "I missed you so much," she said, trying to sound natural. Her eyes darted over Mark's shoulder toward the couch, where Alex stood frozen, his face mirroring Lisa's, shock and panic. Mark noticed her tension and stepped back slightly, his brows knitting together. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. I just didn't expect to see you so soon," Lisa replied, forcing a nervous smile. But Mark's gaze was already moving toward the living room, locking onto the unfamiliar man. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone sharpening as he turned back to Lisa. Lisa scrambled for words, but Alex was quicker. "Hi, I'm Alex, an old friend of Lisa's. We ran into each other a few weeks ago and decided to catch up," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. Mark didn't immediately take his hand. His eyes scanned Alex's face coldly before he gave a brief nod. "I see." Lisa noticed the tension in Mark's shoulders. He wasn't one for surprises, especially not of this kind. "Alex, thank you for stopping by, but Mark and I need to talk." "I'm sure you understand," Lisa said, trying to regain control of the situation. Alex nodded, grabbing his jacket and slowly heading to the door. "Of course. It was nice seeing you, Lisa. And nice meeting you, Mark." When the door closed behind Alex, the silence in the room was deafening. Mark stood staring at Lisa, his face calm but his expression taut. "What was that about?" he asked finally, his voice low but tinged with suspicion. "Nothing. Just an old friend," Lisa replied, avoiding his gaze. "Then why was he in our house? And why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Lisa knew that every answer she gave only deepened his doubts. She felt her fingers start to tremble and clenched them into a fist to hide her unease. "Mark, I honestly don't know how to explain it. He just showed up out of the blue, and I didn't want to be rude," she said, trying to sound calm. Mark nodded slowly, but his gaze remained probing. "Fine, if you say so." He picked up his suitcase and headed toward the bedroom, leaving Lisa standing in the living room with the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. That night, as Mark slept, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. Lisa glanced at the screen and froze. The message was from an unknown number. "Your wife is hiding more than you think. If you want the truth, we need to talk." Mark lay peacefully beside her, his breathing steady, his face relaxed and content, as if everything was as it should be. Lisa, on the other hand, sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the message on his phone. The text was simple, but its impact hit her like a thunderbolt. "Your wife is hiding more than you think. If you want the truth, we need to talk." Her heart pounded so loudly she was afraid it might wake Mark. The number was unfamiliar, but her gut told her who it might be. Alex. He must have decided to take matters into his own hands. Lisa quickly set the phone back in its place and tried to lie down again, but sleep wouldn't come. Her thoughts spiraled around a single terrifying idea. If Mark saw this message, everything would be over. Her life, as she knew it, would be shattered. The next morning, Lisa watched as Mark brewed coffee. He was in a good mood, joking and chatting about his plans for returning to work. She tried to join in, but every word he spoke seemed distant, as if she were listening to him through a thick wall. When Mark went into the shower, Lisa grabbed his phone and swiftly deleted the message. She took a deep breath, feeling a momentary sense of relief. But fear lingered. What if this was just the beginning? The day passed in a haze of tension. Lisa avoided long conversations, trying not to draw attention to herself. She kept thinking about how to confront Alex, how to convince him to stop this reckless plan. Late that night, when Mark was already asleep, Lisa stepped outside, clutching her phone. She dialed Alex's number, and he picked up after the first ring. "Are you insane?" she whispered, her voice shaking with anger. "I did it for us, Lisa." "He deserves to know the truth," Alex replied, his tone calm but resolute. "This won't help. You're just making everything worse. I can't stand by and do nothing anymore." "If you won't tell him, I will," Alex said, ending the call before Lisa could respond, leaving her holding the phone with a growing sense of dread. The next day, Lisa was so tense that she didn't notice how closely Mark was watching her. His suspicions grew, and when he left for work, he decided not to postpone the conversation but to act immediately. Mark began searching for a way to find out who had sent the message. His colleague from the security department agreed to help. Within a few hours, Mark held a printout with the details of the number. His expression changed as he read the sender's name. That evening, he returned home looking calm, but Lisa felt something was off. He invited her to sit down, placed a cup of tea in front of her, and calmly said, "I think we need to talk, Lisa. I got a call from a very interesting acquaintance." "Alex." Lisa froze, struggling to find words, but at that moment, there was a knock at the door. Mark stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Standing on the threshold was Alex. Mark froze in the doorway, staring at Alex, who looked confident, even slightly defiant. He seemed to feel in control of the situation. Lisa stood on the other side of the room, her face drained of all color, and it looked like she was about to faint. "Alex," Mark said quietly, raising his eyebrows slowly. His gaze was cold and piercing. "Hello, Mark. Sorry for the unexpected visit, but I think the three of us need to talk," Alex said as if the entire situation was under his control. Mark didn't take his eyes off Alex, but there was no anger in his voice, just deep suspicion. "About what exactly?" Lisa stepped forward, trying to find a way out. "Mark, I can explain," she began, but her voice trembled traitorously. "Are you sure you want to explain it?" Alex interrupted, walking further into the room. He looked directly at Mark. "Your wife seems to want to leave everything as it is, but I think you deserve to know the truth." Mark slowly closed the door and, crossing his arms over his chest, turned to Lisa. His eyes were filled with mixed emotions: surprise, anger, and a desire to understand what was happening. "Lisa, is there something you want to tell me?" She tried to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. Her gaze darted between Mark and Alex, and it felt like the air was being sucked out of her chest. Taking advantage of her silence, Alex took another step toward Mark. "She can't say it, Mark, because it's difficult, but I can help. While you were away on your business trip, Lisa and we got closer than you could imagine." Those words hung in the air, filling the room with heavy silence. Mark turned to Lisa, his face motionless, but his eyes shone with a dangerous glint. "Is this true, Lisa?" "Mark, it's not what you think," she said, her voice weak, almost a whisper. "Then what is it?" His voice rose, and Lisa felt tears well up in her eyes. Alex didn't hold back another blow. "Lisa is pregnant, Mark, and I think you understand there's a good chance it's my child." Mark froze. His expression went completely blank, then suddenly shifted to icy rage. He slowly walked up to Lisa, never taking his eyes off her. "Could you, just once, tell me the truth? Do you even realize what you've done?" Lisa collapsed onto the couch, pressing her hands to her face. "Mark, I don't know how it happened. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. I never wanted this." Mark turned to Alex, his fists clenched. "And you? What are you doing here? Do you think this is your show? You think you can walk into my house and destroy my life?" Alex didn't back down. "I'm here because I want the truth. And if you can't handle it, that's your problem." Mark took a step forward, and the tension in the room reached its peak. But suddenly, the doorbell rang. All three of them stopped. Mark and Alex exchanged angry glances, while Lisa felt her heart race even faster. Mark, as if sensing something, went to the door and slowly opened it. Standing there was a man in a suit, holding a large envelope. "Mark Jenkins?" the stranger asked. "Yes, that's me." The man handed him the envelope. "You've been officially served. Have a good evening." Mark took the envelope, and the man left, leaving him in confusion. Slowly, Mark opened the documents, his expression growing more strained as he read. Lisa and Alex watched him, not understanding what was happening. Finally, Mark looked up, his eyes filled with pain and anger. "Does anyone want to explain what's going on?" he said, throwing the documents onto the table in front of them. On the top page, it read, "Paternity Establishment Filing. Respondent, Mark Jenkins." Mark froze with the documents in his hands, his gaze filled with anger and disappointment. He looked from Lisa to Alex, as if searching for some kind of explanation. Lisa, who had previously avoided direct eye contact, was now so stunned she didn't even know how to react. Alex, taking advantage of the moment, stepped forward and spoke. "Mark, I know how this looks, but maybe this is the best time to finally have an open conversation. You have the right to know the truth." Mark glared at him with fury. "The truth? From you? Seriously?" "I'm not your enemy, Mark," Alex continued, his tone calm and even persuasive. "I'm here because I want everything on the table. If this is my child, I have the right to be part of their life. But you need to know how this all started. And who are you to decide what I need to know?" Mark snapped, tossing the documents onto the table. Alex didn't falter. He seemed prepared for this conversation, as if he had rehearsed it. I'm the one who was there for Lisa while you were gone. You left her, didn't you? This year was hard for her, and I don't blame her for seeking support. Shut up, Alex, Lisa exclaimed, but her voice sounded weak and unconvincing even to her. Mark's eyes locked onto Lisa. Is that true? You were with him while I was working to provide for us? Mark, it's not like that. It happened once. It was a mistake, she tried to explain, but her words sounded feeble. Once or 10 times, what difference does it make? Alex interjected sharply. What matters is that it happened, and now you have to decide what to do next. But don't fool yourself. The truth is already here, and it can't be hidden. Mark clenched his fists. His anger grew with every word Alex spoke, but instead of lashing out, he took a deep breath and said, Fine. If you want the truth so badly, I'll get it. But not from you. Lisa, I'm giving you a chance. Tell me everything right now. Lisa felt a crushing weight of guilt in her chest. She wanted to tell Mark that this was nothing more than a senseless mistake, but her heart whispered that it was just an excuse. I love you, Mark. That's the truth. But I was lonely, and I did something I regret, she said, swallowing back tears. And now I'm supposed to live with this? He retorted, looking away. Alex, sensing the tension between the couple had reached its peak, decided to strike again. Mark, you need to understand. I'm not here to destroy your marriage. But if this child is mine, I won't back down. I'll take a paternity test, and we'll all get answers. Mark turned sharply to him, his voice now icy. You'll take a test? Then why is your name already on these documents? You've been playing your game this whole time, haven't you? Alex looked momentarily taken aback, but quickly recovered. That doesn't change the facts, Mark. If this is my child, I have the right to know and to be involved in their life. Your child? Mark glanced at Lisa, his eyes filled with disappointment. Do you even believe that? Lisa didn't know what to say. Alex stared at her intently, while Mark waited for an answer. She realized that every word she said now carried a weight that could change everything. The silence was deafening when suddenly there was another knock at the door. All 3 of them flinched. Mark turned sharply and headed to the door. He opened it to find a woman in a formal business suit standing there. Good evening. I'm Alex's attorney, and we have a few matters that need to be discussed in person. Mark froze in the doorway, staring at the lawyer, who held a slim folder of documents in her hands. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes exuded professional confidence. Behind him, Lisa and Alex stood, their faces displaying varying degrees of anxiety. Apologies for the intrusion, but this is a matter that requires attention, the attorney said. Mark turned and allowed her into the living room. His expression was focused, but the tension in the air grew with each passing second. The attorney carefully placed the folder on the table and sat down. My name is Sarah Johnson. I represent Alex's interests. We have filed for paternity establishment as my client has grounds to believe that he is the father of the child Mrs. Lisa Jenkins is carrying, she stated without hesitation. And you think this is okay? To just come here and interfere in our lives? Mark snapped, his anger no longer contained. Sarah raised her hand, maintaining her calm demeanor. I understand your emotions, Mr. Jenkins, but the law grants everyone the right to know the truth. If you want this resolved quickly and without unnecessary conflict, I suggest cooperation. Lisa tried to say something, but her voice failed her. Alex, taking advantage of the moment, stood and added, Mark, you can blame me for anything you want, but that doesn't change the facts. We don't know the truth. The test will reveal everything. If it's your child, I'll step aside. But if it's mine, I will fight for my rights. Mark took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. His eyes locked onto the attorney. And what do you suggest? It's very straightforward. We'll arrange a DNA test after the child is born. All parties will sign an agreement stating that no one will interfere until the results are in. This will give you time and peace to address your personal matters, Sarah proposed, her voice even and confident. Mark thought for a moment, then suddenly turned sharply to Lisa. And how do you imagine this? Do you really want this man and his lawyer dictating how we live our lives? I don't know, Mark, I just want this to be over, Lisa replied, burying her face in her hands. But that's not all, the lawyer added suddenly. All eyes turned to her. Sarah opened her folder and pulled out another document. There's one more detail you should know. Our filing was initiated after receiving anonymous information. This means someone in your circle already knew about this situation and decided to interfere. Mark looked at Lisa, his face frozen in disbelief. Someone new? And who could that be? Sarah closed the folder, her voice remaining professionally neutral. That remains an open question, but I suggest you find out who and why they decided to reveal this information. It could change a lot. Mark felt his mind fill with questions. He stood and walked to the kitchen, trying to gather his thoughts. Alex and the attorney remained in the living room, but Lisa followed him. Mark, I don't know who it could be. Maybe it was a mistake. But you have to believe me. I never wanted any of this to happen. A mistake, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Everything you've done is a mistake. And now we're untangling this mess because someone decided to get involved. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mark, without looking at Lisa, went to answer it. At the door stood their longtime neighbor, Mr. Henderson, an elderly man with a curious gaze. He held an envelope in his hand. Hello, Mark. I believe this belongs to you. This letter was mistakenly placed in my mailbox, he said, handing over the envelope. Mark took the letter, his heart sinking as he saw the words personal, confidential written on it. He opened the envelope right there at the door. Inside was a letter with a brief message. Mark, you deserve to know the truth. Your wife is hiding more than you think. Let's talk tomorrow at 7 p.m. Address below. Lisa approached, trying to read the letter, but Mark sharply turned away, clutching it in his hand. Someone clearly wants me to know about your life, Lisa, and I'm going to find out exactly what. Mark sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The invitation for the meeting lay on the passenger seat, burning into his vision. The address led to a small cafe in the city center. The clock on the dashboard read 6:45 p.m. He was early, but he couldn't stand staying at home any longer, watching Lisa and Alex pretend nothing had happened. His thoughts were chaotic. Who is this? Why are they so insistent that I know the truth? And what truth could possibly still be untold? Mark exhaled heavily and stepped out of the car. The cold evening wind brushed against him, but he didn't care. He quickly crossed the street and entered the cafe. The space was nearly empty except for a few patrons. In the corner sat a middle-aged woman with dark hair tied in a bun. She looked calm, but there was tension in her gaze. Mark stopped, took a breath, and approached her. You wrote to me? He asked, standing at her table. The woman looked up and nodded. Yes. Please, sit down, Mark. We need to talk. Mark slowly sat, his eyes never leaving her face. Who are you? And why are you so interested in my life? My name is Catherine, and I believe we can help each other. But first, let me tell you a story, she said, choosing her words carefully. Mark crossed his arms over his chest, openly displaying his hostility. I'm not here for stories. Get to the point. Catherine sighed and leaned closer. Fine. Do you know that your wife and Alex have worked together on deception before? This isn't their first time. Alex isn't just an old acquaintance of your wife. They've been connected long before your marriage. Mark froze. Her words sounded absurd, yet they stirred a strange feeling, as if everything was finally beginning to make sense. What are you trying to say? He croaked, feeling his fists clenched tightly. It's simple. Lisa and Alex have always been closer than she's told you. And now they're using this situation to either rekindle what they had or create something entirely new, Catherine said, her voice calm yet firm. Mark looked at her with disbelief. Why should I believe you? Who are you? I used to be the attorney for one of the women Alex deceived in the past. He always follows the same pattern. Gains their trust, makes them dependent on him, and then uses it for his own benefit. Your wife is just another one of his targets. But I don't think she realizes yet how dangerous he is, Catherine replied, pulling a few documents from her bag. Mark took the papers and quickly skimmed through them. They contained photos, messages, and even financial transactions showing how Alex manipulated other women. He knows how to exploit situations to his advantage. And now he wants to destroy your marriage to gain access to your wife and possibly your future child, Catherine added. Mark felt his heart tighten with anger. He raised his eyes to Catherine. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know who you're dealing with, and to be prepared to protect yourself and your family. If you let him win, everything you've loved will be destroyed, she answered. Mark remained silent, his thoughts chaotic. He stood up, thanked Catherine, and quickly left the cafe, clutching the documents under his jacket. When he returned home, Lisa was in the kitchen, and Alex was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. Mark entered the room, his expression unreadable. Alex, we need to talk. Now, he said, his voice so firm that even Alex looked slightly uneasy. But before Mark could take another step, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message. If you want to learn more, come to the warehouses on 5th Street at 10 p.m. Don't draw attention. This concerns Lisa. Mark's eyes narrowed, filled with determination. He turned on his heel and left the house without saying another word. His movements were precise and resolute, but Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she watched him close the door. Alex, still on the couch, studied Mark intently, his expression changing. Something's not right, Alex muttered. Lisa looked at him, her anxiety growing. What do you mean? His behavior. He knows something or suspects something. I'm not letting this slide, Alex said, standing abruptly. Alex, don't. We've already gone too far, Lisa said, her voice weak, as if she didn't believe her own words. Lisa, this isn't just your life. If he finds out something, everything could fall apart. Is that what you want? Lisa didn't answer. Alex grabbed his jacket and left the house, leaving her alone in a heavy silence. Mark drove through the dark streets, wondering what awaited him at the warehouses. The uncertainty was nerve-wracking, but he felt he was finally getting closer to the truth. He double-checked the address on his phone to ensure he was heading to the right place. When he arrived, he turned off his headlights and cautiously stepped out of the car. The warehouses were old, lit only by dim streetlights. The cold evening wind bit at him, but he paid it no mind. Mark moved deeper into the area, looking for someone or something that could answer his questions. On a large iron door hung a chain, but it wasn't locked. He pushed the door, and it creaked open, revealing a dark interior. Mark Jenkins, right? A voice called from the shadows. Mark turned and saw a middle-aged man with a stern face and a deep voice. He stood near a table with papers and an old laptop. Who are you? Mark asked, trying to keep his composure. My name is Thomas. My job is to tell people what they don't want to hear. In your case, it's the truth about Alex and your wife, he said, gesturing for Mark to sit. Mark approached the table, his face unreadable. Thomas pulled a flash drive out of his pocket. This contains everything you need to know. But you must understand. Once you see this, there's no turning back, he warned. Why are you doing this? Why does this matter to you? It's a long story, but trust me, it's more important than you think, Thomas replied, his voice tinged with mystery. At that moment, the warehouse door suddenly swung open again. Mark and Thomas turned to see Alex enter, his eyes filled with determination. Well, Thomas, decided to play your dirty little games, didn't you? Alex said as he walked toward them. Mark shot to his feet, looking from Alex to Thomas. What's going on here? He demanded, his voice laced with anger. Alex, you've always been a master of lies, but this time, you've gone too far, Thomas replied calmly. Don't listen to him, Mark. He just wants to destroy everything you have. That flash drive, it's all lies, every bit of it, Alex said, his voice growing tense. Mark stared at the two men, his fists clenched. His patience was wearing thin. Someone here is lying. And I'm about to find out who, he said, reaching for the flash drive. Alex lunged for the table, trying to stop him, but Mark was quicker. He grabbed the flash drive and stepped back, holding it firmly in his hand. Now I'll find out what's really going on, he said, his voice steely. Thomas nodded. You should. But be prepared for what you'll discover. At that moment, the warehouse door opened again. Standing in the doorway was Lisa, her eyes filled with panic. Mark, don't do this. Mark froze, holding the flash drive in his hand, his gaze fixed on Lisa, who stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. Her voice trembled, but her stance was resolute. "Mark, please, just hear me out before you do this," she pleaded, taking a few steps forward. "Hear you out? Hear what, Lisa? Another lie you want to tell me?" Mark's voice was filled with anger, but also pain. Alex, standing near Thomas, couldn't resist interjecting. "Don't listen to her, Mark. She knows the truth will hurt her more than you can imagine. Look how she's panicking." Lisa spun toward Alex, her face filled with indignation. "Do you even understand what you've done? This is all because of you." "Because of me?" Alex stepped forward, his voice sharper. "I'm only here because I want justice, and you're terrified everything you've hidden will come to light." Mark's gaze shifted between Lisa, Alex, and Thomas. His eyes burned with the desire to finally uncover the truth. He pocketed the flash drive and began moving toward the exit. "Mark, wait." Lisa ran after him, grabbing his arm. "This isn't what you think. You can't believe what you'll see on that flash drive." "Oh, and why not?" Mark asked coldly, pulling his arm free. "Because it'll tear apart your web of lies?" Alex, realizing that Mark had made up his mind, stepped forward. "You shouldn't do this, Mark. This information could change everything, but not in the way you think." Mark stepped back, bracing himself for a potential confrontation. "What are you hiding, Alex? What are you so afraid I'll find?" "That's none of your business," Alex snarled, lunging at Mark, trying to grab the flash drive from his pocket. Mark reacted instinctively, shoving Alex away. Alex fell but quickly got back up, clearly intent on proving his point. Thomas stepped back, watching the altercation with a cold, calculating gaze. "Alex, stop it," Lisa yelled, but her voice was drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Mark tried to keep his distance, but Alex was relentless. Their movements became chaotic, and one of them hit an old shelf, causing it to sway and crash to the ground with a deafening clatter. In the chaos, Thomas suddenly shouted, "Enough! If you keep this up, it will end badly for everyone." Breathing heavily, Mark clutched the flash drive in his hand. Alex stood a few steps away, his face red with anger. "You don't understand what you're doing," Alex yelled. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago," Mark replied, turning sharply and heading for the exit. Lisa rushed after him, but Alex grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Lisa, you have to choose. Now." "Choose?" She looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "You want me to choose between lies and the truth?" Mark stopped at the doorway, hearing her words. He turned and looked at her, his face unreadable. "But can you live with what you choose, Lisa?" he asked coldly, not waiting for an answer. Suddenly, the sound of a police siren pierced the air. Everyone froze, and Mark felt his heart pound even harder. Thomas quietly said, "Looks like someone else has plans for this evening." Mark didn't wait. He bolted out of the warehouse, leaving the others behind. Alex started to go after him again, but this time Lisa wrenched her arm free from his grip and ran after Mark. As Mark got into his car and started the engine, he saw Lisa running toward him, with Alex trailing behind, looking increasingly desperate. Mark felt anger rising within him, but also something else, a deep fear of what he was about to uncover. He pressed the gas pedal and disappeared into the darkness, leaving them both behind. Alex stood by the warehouse, watching as Mark's car vanished into the night. His face was tense, and his eyes betrayed one emotion: desperation. He knew that if Mark uncovered the full truth, his plan would fall apart, and he'd lose not only control of the situation but also Lisa. "What now?" Lisa's voice broke his thoughts. She stood nearby, breathing heavily after catching up with him. Her eyes were filled with tears and fear. "Now we need to act quickly," Alex said, turning to her sharply. "Mark cannot find out what's on that flash drive. If he sees its contents, everything will be over for both of us." "For both of us?" Lisa shot back, her voice laced with anger. "You dragged me into this mess. You insisted we keep going. And you think you had a choice?" Alex snapped, his voice turning cold. "Do you want Mark to know everything? About the child? About us? If he finds out, Your perfect little family will disappear, and you'll be left with nothing. Lisa grabbed her head, trying to collect her thoughts. She knew Alex was right. Their actions had already created enough chaos, and now everything was teetering on the edge. Fine, she finally said, her voice resolute. What's your plan? Alex nodded, satisfied with her agreement. We need to find him before he reaches a laptop or any other device where he can open that flash drive. I know where he might go. And where is that? Lisa asked warily. The one place he feels safe. His office, Alex replied, and they quickly got into the car. Mark, meanwhile, arrived at his office. He shut the door behind him, the sound echoing through the empty space. His hands trembled as he inserted the flash drive into his laptop. Several files appeared on the screen. Each file was labeled and dated, forming a clear timeline of events. Mark opened the first file but was interrupted by his phone vibrating. It was a call from Lisa. He ignored it. He needed answers, and he knew the flash drive held them. Opening the second file, Mark found photos of Alex with other women. Some of the pictures were taken in intimate settings. The more he scrolled, the clearer it became that Alex had not only manipulated women but also deceived people financially. Alex and Lisa arrived at the office minutes later. They saw the lights were already on inside. Alex parked across the street and turned to Lisa. We'll go in together. You'll talk to him and distract him while I find the flash drive. We have to act in sync, he said, his voice tense. Are you sure this will work? Lisa asked, but Alex didn't respond, merely stepping out of the car. When they entered the office, Mark was seated at his desk, his expression rigid but his eyes burning with anger. He looked up as they walked in. What are you doing here? His voice was cold and resolute. Mark, we're here to talk, Lisa began, stepping closer. It's too late to talk, Lisa. I already know almost everything, he replied, holding up the flash drive in his hand. Alex, seizing the moment, moved closer, but Mark quickly caught on to his intentions. One more step, Alex, and I'll call the police, he said, his tone sharp. Do you even know what's on that flash drive? Alex asked curtly, his eyes gleaming with tension. I know enough to understand who you really are, Mark replied, standing up from his chair. But do you know who's really behind all these files? Do you think it's just a coincidence? Alex took a step forward, and at that moment, Lisa grabbed the flash drive from the table. Enough. We don't have time for these games, she exclaimed, hiding the flash drive in her pocket. Both Mark and Alex turned to her, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. What are you doing, Lisa? Mark asked. I'm trying to fix what we've all destroyed, she replied, looking them both in the eyes. At that moment, the office door suddenly swung open, and two men in suits with badges entered. FBI. We have some questions for all three of you, one of them said, pulling out a badge. The FBI agents stood in the doorway, their faces impassive, their voices firm. The room fell silent except for the sound of Lisa and Mark's heavy breathing. Alex, who had just been trying to regain control of the situation, now looked unsettled but not defeated. Mark Jenkins? One of the agents said, glancing at him. Yes, that's me, Mark replied, trying to comprehend what was happening. We've received information that you were in possession of materials related to a federal investigation. We have a warrant to seize the flash drive you obtained this evening, the agent said, showing him a document. Mark looked at Lisa, who stood off to the side, clutching the flash drive in her pocket. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with terror. What are you talking about? Alex snapped, stepping forward. And you, Alex Barnes, are also under investigation. We have questions about your activities, which may violate several federal laws, including fraud and money laundering, the other agent said, keeping his gaze on Alex. Alex stepped back, his confidence beginning to waver. This must be a mistake. I haven't done anything, he said, his voice tense. Mistake? Lisa suddenly said, her voice loud and strained. You're calling this a mistake? Alex, this is all because of you. Lisa, don't start, Alex said, trying to stay calm. No, I can't keep quiet anymore, she replied, her hands trembling. Mark looked at her with disbelief. What are you hiding, Lisa? She took a deep breath and looked directly at him. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but they also showed determination. I have to tell you the truth, Mark. This isn't just about Alex. It's about me. I did something you'll never forgive me for, she said, her voice growing quieter. And what is that? Mark asked, his voice full of anger and pain. Lisa pulled the flash drive from her pocket and threw it onto the table in front of the agents. There's not just evidence against Alex on this flash drive. There's also information about me. I helped him. I knew what he was doing, but did nothing to stop him. Mark took a step back, as if her words had physically hit him. What did you just say? You knew about this and said nothing? Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I thought I could fix it, but then it got out of control. Alex blackmailed me. If I didn't help him, he would. He would tell everything he knows about us. And what does he know about us, Lisa? Mark asked, his voice quiet but full of rage. Lisa lowered her eyes, unable to look at him. He knows that I had a relationship with him long before we got married. And that the child I'm carrying, the child? Mark interrupted her, his face turning to stone. Lisa fell silent, unsure how to continue. Her words hung in the air, and Mark took another step back, as if trying to create distance between them. It's true, Mark, Alex interjected, once again trying to take control of the situation. There's a chance this child is mine, but I'm not here to ruin your marriage. I just want to know the truth. The truth? Mark glared at him with anger. You don't even know what the word means. The agents exchanged glances, and one of them said, We'll continue this discussion at the station. All three of you will need to come with us to provide statements. Mark nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Lisa. As they exited the office, Mark paused for a moment. His gaze was directed at the dark night sky, but his thoughts circled around one phrase repeating in his head. Will I ever be able to forgive this? Just then, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Pulling it out, he read the message. What you learned today is just the beginning. If you want to know more, you know where to find me. Mark gripped the phone tightly in his hand, his eyes glinting with determination. Mark sat in a small interrogation room. The cold, metal table chilled his hands, and the overhead lamp cast a harsh light that made him squint. Across from him sat an FBI agent with a stern expression. Through the glass window, Mark could see Lisa and Alex in separate rooms, yet it felt as if they were still connected by an invisible thread, a thread of lies and betrayal poisoning his life. The agent, who had introduced himself as Detective Miller, began. Mark, we've reviewed part of the content on the flash drive. This is a complex case, and we can't disclose all the details, but I can tell you this. Your acquaintance, Alex Barnes, isn't who he claims to be. He's involved in international financial schemes tied to fraud and money laundering. We need your testimony to understand how much you knew about his activities. Mark shook his head, the weight of the words sinking in. I didn't know anything. To me, he was just a problem in my marriage. Miller tilted his head slightly, studying Mark. And what about your wife, Lisa Jenkins? She admitted to knowing about some of his activities. Were you aware of this? Mark felt a painful squeeze in his chest. Lisa had known all along but kept it from him. Instead of being honest, she had let the situation spiral out of control. No, I didn't know. I had no idea she was involved in any of this, Mark replied, forcing himself to remain composed. Miller nodded. All right, but her testimony indicates that she wasn't just complicit by silence. We've found transactions linking her to his illegal activities. Transactions? Mark repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. Yes, we have evidence that she transferred money between accounts controlled by Barnes. It could have been a cover or a forced decision, but the fact remains. We also know she was aware of his schemes involving other women, Miller continued. Mark felt his world crumbling. Everything he believed in, everything he had fought for, now seemed like part of a larger lie. I want to talk to her, he said abruptly, standing up. That's possible, but we need to ensure you won't influence her testimony, Miller warned. I just want the truth. If she was truly involved, I need to hear it from her, Mark said firmly. When Mark entered the room, Lisa sat at the same metal table, staring at the floor. Her shoulders were tense, and her face looked exhausted. She didn't even look up when the door closed behind him. "Lisa," Mark said, sitting across from her. She slowly raised her eyes, filled with shame. "I know you knew about Alex. I know you helped him. But why? What made you do it?" Lisa exhaled heavily and then said, "Mark, it wasn't what I wanted. Alex started threatening me long before you found out about him. He said he'd tell you about our history if I didn't help him. And then, it all got out of control. Your history with him is the past. But you had a choice, Lisa. You could have come to me instead of playing along with his dirty games." His voice was filled with bitterness. "I was scared, Mark. Scared of losing you, losing everything we've built." Her voice broke, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "And now what? What do you expect from me? Forgiveness? Sympathy?" He leaned back, his fists clenching again. Lisa sobbed and looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. The child I'm carrying, it's yours, Mark. And that's the only thing I know for sure." Mark froze, trying to process her words. Two emotions wrestled in his heart, anger and hope. Suddenly, the door opened, and Agent Miller entered the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've just received new information. Alex Barnes has admitted he wasn't acting alone. You may have other enemies you're not even aware of," he said, looking at Mark. Mark and Lisa exchanged glances. "What does that mean?" Mark asked. "It means the game has just begun," Miller replied, handing them a thin folder. Mark opened it and saw something that made his heart race faster. Mark sat in the same room, staring at the folder before him. The documents he had just reviewed were incomprehensible. They indicated that Alex was not the mastermind behind all of this. Someone else, powerful and meticulous, was pulling the strings. Lisa, sitting next to him, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Her gaze was filled with remorse, but also hope. "Mark, I know all of this has broken you. But please, give me a chance to make it right," she said softly but sincerely. Mark brushed her hand aside and stood up, looking at her. "Make it right? Lisa, you don't understand how broken everything is. You were part of this. And now I don't know if I can trust you with anything," he said, his voice laden with pain. Lisa turned away, tears streaming down her cheeks again. At that moment, Agent Miller re-entered the room. "We're done with Alex. He's signed a cooperation agreement, but warned that this isn't over. He said the people behind him won't let you just walk away from this," he said, sitting across from Mark. "What does that mean for us?" Lisa asked, her voice barely audible. "It means you both need to decide how to move forward. We'll provide protection if necessary. But Mark, you need to understand. This is just the surface. This case runs deeper than you can imagine," Miller replied. Mark looked at Lisa, then back at the folder before him. His life would never be the same. He realized he had two options: leave it all behind or gather himself and fight for the truth. He stood, grabbed the folder, and walked toward the door. Pausing, he turned back to Lisa. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but if you truly want to make things right, you'll have to start with the truth. Not just with me, but with everyone," he said, his voice filled with determination. Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with hope. As Mark exited the room, Agent Miller turned to Lisa. "Your husband is stronger than you think, but even he will need time to process all of this." Lisa sighed softly, looking at the door that had just closed behind Mark. Months later, Mark sat in his new home, far from the city where his life had fallen apart. He was flipping through old photographs, trying to find meaning in them. His phone vibrated on the table, and he saw a message from Lisa. "I'm working with the FBI. I told them everything. I hope you find a way to move forward. The child deserves to know their father." Mark stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Could he give her another chance? Should he, for the sake of the child? What do you think? Should Mark give Lisa a chance, or is their story over for good? What would you do in his place?